as a software engineer, I always say less words, more visual. It always persuades people, especially like higher you go up the change, like the less time you don't have a lot of time to read, I guess. So when we're presenting our problems to VPs or execs and whatnot, we actually try minimizing as much technical jargon, as many words as we can, and we put in more visuals, like more diagrams, more input outputs.
Hello, hola, ni hao, salud, namaste, everyone, wherever in the world you're listening to this, and welcome to 100 Sum Game, a podcast where we discuss negotiation, persuasion, and influence. Join me as I interview master negotiators from a new industry each episode and get inspired to get the best outcome for yourself while creating value for your counterpart. My name is Adele. I'm a recent economics and psychology grad with experience in finance and marketing, and I'm fascinated by the power of negotiation to change your life and career. Whether you're an early or seasoned professional looking to accelerate your career, negotiate your value, and tactfully handle conflicts, or simply a curious individual aiming to level up your soft skills, leave your shoes and missed opportunities at the door, and let's get started. Welcome, and hope you're ready to dive into soft skills side of the world of tech and data with me and my guest Mohaimen Khan, a seasoned software engineer at Microsoft. He works in their developer division, specifically on the code indexing and navigation team for Visual Studio, Azure DevOps, and GitHub. Please let us know down in the Q&A section what you're struggling with when it comes to persuasion, anything specific you want to know, an industry you want featured next, or any tactic you find that works within your niche. Your voice guides this ship, and I want this podcast to be as valuable to you as it can. So, without further ado, Mohaimen, welcome and thanks for taking the time, joining all the way from the Microsoft headquarters, Washington State.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Super, super excited when you reached out to me. As I said, it's great to be here. Obviously, I really like what you're doing of reaching out to younger people and like talking through a lot of the struggles they're facing, I guess, like in their day-to-day jobs and whatnot. So I'm really, really glad to be here, and I want to help as much as I can, for sure.
Thanks for the kind words. I love that. Okay, so you have a very impressive background. So why don't we start with getting to know more about you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Mohaimen. As you have introduced, I currently work for Microsoft for code navigation and indexing under the Visual Studio org, which fits right under cloud and AI. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into like my background. So I graduated from the University of Toronto. I believe I graduated in 2020. I studied computer engineering with a minor in business, and I joined Microsoft right off the bat. I started off in the Windows servicing department. Like I was a software engineer there, and my main day-to-day task was mostly working with Windows pipelines and writing code that would help users upgrade their Windows, making the stack more clean and clear. And mostly I was actually working with Windows 11 at that time before it got released and whatnot. I think over a year and a half, like I worked there, and then I eventually had an offer to join Amazon for one of their special projects, which was helping children from third world countries have an online educational platform. And to me, that's something I deeply, passionately care about. So I ended up picking that immediately as I could, and I was really lucky to work on a special project like that. I worked on it for about a year. While I did that, Microsoft actually, my current team that I'm on right now, they ended up giving me an offer. So I boomeranged back to Microsoft, and I joined as like a senior engineer on my current team. Yeah, I've been here since then. It's been almost a year and a half again, and super, super excited to be a part of this current team and the current vision of Microsoft, obviously, which includes a lot of AI, a lot of Copilot, as people have talked about.
That's so good. I was already impressed, but like the more you spoke about it, I was like, wow.
Thank you.
It's very challenging to get into those, companies that are literally the most sought out companies in the world. So congrats to you and all your success. And this episode, we're gonna go a little bit beyond the code. So tell us, what do negotiation and persuasion interactions look like in software engineering?
As a software engineer, obviously, I think a lot of our jobs, like even though people on like a higher scale or from like an external point of view, it doesn't seem like we deal a lot with like people and whatnot. But one of the things that we deal heavily on a day-to-day basis is actually mostly, which uses a lot of our soft skills. And Like in terms of persuasion, negotiation, some of these skills come into handy when you're having like feature prioritization or, for example, design decisions, code reviews, or cross-team collaboration. And obviously, so many technical decisions that happen beyond just like your immediate day-to-day mundane tasks. So I think like on a higher level, these are the different areas where we mostly negotiate on what to do and what not to do, like communicating with your colleagues, and obviously persuade your managers and your senior managers or like your directors that like, hey, XYZ features are necessary over ABC features, for example. Again, I can dive deeper into each one of them, but these are on like a higher level. Basically, these are the areas that we generally use a lot of our negotiation capabilities and whatnot.
Right. I'm also curious, how do you believe you leverage these skills when entering Microsoft or, as you mentioned, Amazon, with numerous highly skilled candidates excelling in technical interviews nowadays? How do you persuade the hiring team that you're the one?
Right. So that's actually an excellent question. And like when I was like thinking about this thing, I guess that hit me because like you're absolutely correct. Like as developers,
Mhm.
even today when I'm interviewing someone else, I was like, hey, what did I really do? And what would I have done in the candidate's shoes? Why are their soft skills so important? I think like a lot of people don't value this, but as developers, like your soft skills are so crucial. And this comes from myself, but like especially because I think that like you can make really good developers, like you can make, but they might not be the best at communicating with others. And if that happens, and if they're a poor teammate, everything suffers. I would rather have a teammate who's not as strong technically, they communicate really well. I would rather pick them over someone who's like really technical, but they cannot communicate. The reason I say this is because like we value in our line of work, obviously a lot of people are working on the same code base, which means a lot of like collaboration goes towards like, someone is like pushing some code, someone's working on one feature, other person's working on another feature. And if you have a teammate who is really bad at or who's really poor at communicating, it's so hard to work with them because like they can be, they can make the most technically complicated product, and then you kind of think about it and like the entire team has to suffer learning about what their work has been, and then it's just like a lot of like back and forth which ends up doing more damage than good. So when I was interviewing, I guess like per se, my thing was like, hey, I have to show these people that like I can be a really good teammate. Obviously there's certain technical benchmarks that you obviously have to overcome, but understanding the fact that like if someone's asking you, hey, how do you work in a team, like there are some red flags, right? Like if someone's like, oh, I don't particularly need a team, I can just do this myself, that itself is like a severe red flag. One of the things that I during my interviews that I did was told the hiring team of my numerous group projects slash things that I've worked on before, especially when I was in school, when I was like part of multiple clubs. I was talking to them about like how I orchestrated and coordinated with different teams and divided up my responsibilities. I wasn't afraid to show them that like, hey, I wasn't a one-man army where I did everything. Like the thing that I was showing them, like, hey, I divided my task into like smaller blocks, and then like after doing the blocks, I orchestrated and communicated like how I could divide that up between like different. It played out so well because it clearly showed the kind of person that I was at that particular moment in time. I wasn't trying to be like, hey, let me micromanage everything. Let me do every single thing. It was more so like, hey, I'm communicating saying that, okay, XYZ needs to be done. I can handle X if someone can handle Y and the other person can handle Z. At least like to me, it showed the hiring manager this person is good at like dividing up tasks, also telling other people what they can do versus what they cannot do. That ended up being super helpful in my opinion.
Right. And that makes sense because I feel like a lot of people, a lot of, aspiring software engineers who want to get into these companies, they over index on acing the technical interview. They do a lot of prep, they buy those prep courses, but then they don't really pay that much attention into those other behavioral questions that will come up actually in the interview, and then they fail, getting an offer.
Right.
So that's really, really good advice.
One other piece is like seeing things from like a higher level. Like while I was talking about it, actually, I also wanted to add that in. You have to have a vision of seeing things from like a higher level. It's so crucial. Like when I was saying that, like if I know that on a higher level I'm working on X, Y, Z, but if it has three tasks, X, Y, and Z, I need to have like a higher level vision. So always take your mind off of a single task or like a single problem and see what the overall vision is. This is so handy because even in an interview, when they're giving you a very challenging technical problem, or let's say like I'm giving a challenging technical problem to like some software engineer doing their interviews, I know a lot of the times I do not expect them to solve the whole thing because like the technical interviews are like what 30, 45 minutes long, and it would be absurd to like assume that like someone can solve that. I think a lot of the time what I try seeing is if someone can see like the higher level picture, and they can be like, hey, by the way, you asked me this, it's not as challenging, slash, I don't need to solve this like whole big problem, it's not super complicated. As soon as you take a higher level step, an example can be like I go into an interview being like, hey, by the way, design me Google Maps, for example. I say this. If let's say you don't see the high level vision, you're gonna dive right into coding. But if you are the kind of person who sees the bigger picture, first question should be like, hey, what do you mean by design a Google Maps? Like, I mean, it's already there. Like, are you saying that like, hey, go to googlemaps.com, or like, are you saying like, is it for like one person or 10 people? What's the scale? Like, ask these questions because by asking these questions, by asking these higher level questions, you can actually make your problem a lot smaller, and then you can be technically more successful as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, strategic thinking, right? Seeing the bigger vision, not
Mm-hmm.
getting lost in those little details or little building blocks. That's a really important skill that people, those aspiring software engineers are like, okay, I just need to know code, I just need to know the language. But no, as you said, when you ask follow-up questions to really define the question, the problem,
Mm,
that's when people understand the value that you can add.
100%.
Okay, so as we're moving on to the second topic of this episode, we know that code doesn't make sense for everyone. This means that as a software engineer, I assume you don't always get to deal with people who understand your work. You don't always do that in order to drive business impact. So, curious, what are some of the tactics you employ when dealing with non technical teams?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I have like step by step process for this. This is because I deal with a lot of the time, because again, because of the product that we use, it's so technical. VS Code or Azure DevOps, when it comes to like the business behind it, you have to like translate this entire very technical product into like very non-technical words, or like features into very non-technical features. I think I like the step-by-step process that I follow is like, I think it's like a 6 to 7 step process. But step one is identify the problem. When you bring your problem to a very non-technical team, you have to like make sure that the problem that you're bringing up, or like you're trying the technical jargon, or like whatever you're bringing up, understand and like translate it to like a higher level problem. What that means is, don't be like, hey, this website doesn't load because of some backend lambda function that's not being loaded, and it's like crashing because it's throwing some 403 errors. I say that to my parents. I use my parents because both my parents they come from a non-technical background. If I say that to my parents, they'll be like, what is the 403? Like, what are you talking about? Or what's a lambda? So understand and identify what the problem is. This is very, very, very crucial in step one. Being like, hey, the problem is the website doesn't load because of some authentication error. This is very clear. This translates to like someone saying that, hey, okay, this doesn't load because of XYZ. And someone who doesn't know a lot of the technical terms, they can understand what's happening. Step two is gather evidence. Is this the right problem? So essentially, like, if you're bringing a technical problem and if you're translating it, you're trying to like slim it down, make sure you gather evidence that's the right problem. Sometimes, like, if it's happening like 99% of the time, that's a problem. But if it's like happening 1 or 100 times, this is not a problem. In this case, this is like you're finding an off case, and you also have to like prioritize, saying that, hey, is this really a problem, or is this just like it's like a transient error and whatnot. So make sure you collect enough data and evidence. This can include performance metrics, error logs, user feedback, things like that. These obviously they all add up, and these can just only support your case. When you're trying to like gather evidence, use visuals. I think this is super crucial, and people keep on forgetting about this. But as a software engineer, I always say less words, more visual. It always persuades people, especially like higher you go up the chain, like the less time you don't have a lot of time to read, I guess. So when we're presenting our problems to VPs or execs and whatnot, we actually try minimizing as much technical jargon, as many words as we can, and we put in more visuals, like more diagrams, more input outputs, so that it makes it very clear to someone with like a naked eye who has no context to this, being like, okay, I can put myself into this diagram and I understand like what's coming in, what's going out. um, like the final thing is focus on the business impact. This is so crucial because money talks. Money talks at any company that any company that you work in. So focus on the business impact of what's the state before and what's the state after. This can mean a variety of things in like different aspects, but talk about like what's out there. Is it a security issue? How much money is the business losing, or how much money is the business gaining by doing this? And you can simulate that, because generally with any sort of cloud services where most things are hosted these days, you can actually understand like how much money you're saving versus how much money is it costing you. So if you do all of these, what happens is like you can actually establish a trust relationship with your non-technical colleagues and seniors. And as you build this trust, it makes it a lot easier for other people to be like, to come to you being like, hey, okay, I think it's a good decision, go for it. Yeah, so I think these are the steps that I use. It's like a 7 step long process, but honestly, I it has worked out super well for myself.
Yeah. No, that's I love that you broke it down to, step by step process. I think people just get confused because it's such a vague question, right? How do you persuade non-technical teams? But
Mm,
as as being an engineer that you are, you're like, okay, even this problem, I'm going to break it down into its little steps. I love that. How about in situations where there's like conflict? Do you have any like tips and tricks of navigating conflict scenarios with those non-technical teams where you're maybe looking at the problem from slightly different aspects? So how do you sort of manage those expectations and keep people on the same page?
absolutely, fantastic questions, and I think this is one thing that no university actually teach you, and it's such a funny question. Like it's like a funny aspect too, because yeah, when you're a student, you hear about all these things where people are like, "Hey, how do you deal with conflict? How have you dealt with the conflict between your group projects and whatnot?" But conflict at work is like, it's almost like pretty much evident, that comes up every day, and you meet different people, and like different teams deal with conflict differently, right? My current team, I have a very fantastic team, and we had an issue where people don't raise questions, like everyone trusts each other too much, so we almost have no conflict. It became an issue that like we had to have workshops to like stand up against other people's idea, to be like, hey, you guys can't agree with everything that I say, you have to like say no. Versus I had that it's so funny. Versus I have also had teams where people are very, very aggressive towards change, and when you try proposing anything, it is really, really hard to persuade other people. All that to say is like you're going to deal with conflict in a workplace setting, more or less, in many different shape or form. But I think step one to resolving conflict is to like understand and have an open mind. Like understand the other person's point of view, or understand the other team's point of view of what they're trying to say. Why are they resisting? And have an open mind. You don't always need to agree with what the other person is saying. It is okay to be like, hey, I understand this is not in my lane, or this is not something that I prefer. But it's also okay to be like, have an open mind. If you're the one proposing a change, for example, you're trying to propose a change and you're facing conflict, I think the best way is obviously always build like a prototype, slash always have like some sort of like proof of concept, like a POC is what I say. Have some sort of document, or have some sort of proof, some sort of thing which kind of like supports your cause. Because when you bring up an idea, let's say I bring up like a brand new idea to someone which changes like the entire infrastructure, obviously that person will like not agree with anything that I'm doing, because it's like it changes the dynamics of everything. By the nature of humans, we're resistant to changes. So if you bring a proof of concept, it's easier to like visualize, saying that, hey, maybe this is like a nice idea that we can have. Second step is like, hear their points. Why are they resisting? If someone says, hey, I don't think we should do this, ask them, set up a one-on-one meeting with them, rather than being like, no, I can't, I don't agree with you. Just set up a one-on-one meeting after, being like, hey, let's talk about this. What do you think some of the issues are with this problem? Talk back and forth and come to a compromise. This can mean that like, hey, would you be okay if this issue was resolved, this issue was resolved, and try negotiating to like a halfway through. And finally, I would say, if the other person is not open towards change at all, obviously you can, you know, as an individual, as an IC, you can always bring like individual contributor. You can always bring this up to your manager, who can also like fight these battles for you. For someone who is absolutely not open to any sort of change, and then you can like go towards like understanding and have like more meetings and talk through them. But fundamentally, dealing with conflict should always come down to like being open-minded, being humble, and being a good learner. Always remember that like there's nothing wrong if someone resists or someone is like not okay with your plan. Talk to them. I think you can always come to a compromise where you can see what their point of view was and they can understand what your point of view is.
This really resonated with me because I have also done something similar where to persuade the unpersuadable, I like made little demos of whatever is it that I'm suggesting, and I like showed it to like my manager, my boss, and she's like, okay, here's like a little bite of what this would look like. This it's similar to what you have done, and I think it really helps when you're trying to drive change because, as you said, we don't like to change things, especially people who are a lot been in the field doing the work for a longer time. It's hard for people to
Great.
change their minds. So that's great information.
Yeah, if when you're working full time, you don't always have to accept every idea that comes to you. And this is where I strongly resonate with one of Amazon's leadership principle, which is like one of their leadership principles like disagree and commit. And then the other one was like having a backbone. So which means that like when if you disagree with an idea that everyone is you're having opposition for, commit to it, build a prototype, do something, and bring it to your manager or bring it to the people. And if you still have issues, you can come to a compromise as well. So you don't have to always be okay with being like, if someone says, hey, do it this way, you don't always have to agree with it. And you will face conflict because like all of our work is so intertwined, especially in software, because you come in, you're touching a code base or a product that has been there for like 30 years, and like at least like 400 or 500 developers have worked on it. So obviously when you try changing a major thing out of it, you're definitely going to face like a lot of pushback for sure.
Yeah. And this thing that you mentioned, setting up some one on one time to speak about people's resistance is also, I think, really important because we spoke about it in the management consulting episode as well with an EM from
Mhm.
McKinsey. She was also suggesting that, okay, if a senior partner or a lead client is resisting, let's have some one on one time because people are more comfortable, people are more open to sharing their actual feelings and reservations
Yeah.
in private. So it's really important, it's really, I think, critical to go to extra mile, take that step of setting up some time with that person and really understanding where they're coming from. We've discussed some very critical information in this episode. Just before we end off, I want to know, for aspiring or early career software engineers currently listening to us, what advice do you have for them? What is the one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing is like staying humble and having an open mind, for sure. Always stay humble. You can always learn more, and always listening to others. Like I think when you go into a room, when you're presenting an idea, always remember that your ideas can have pushback, and it's okay. Always have an open mind to accept that pushback, because from that pushback, to most of the time, it's not a criticism to your idea. A lot of the time it can only make your idea a lot better. So keep on having an open mind, for sure.
Right. And don't take things personally. Um,
Yeah. 100%.
All right. Thank you so much, Mohammed, joining all the way from, well, now from Toronto, Canada. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your amazing recommendations and insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
All right. I hope you took as much valuable information as I did and more. My name is Adele, and you have listened to an episode from 100 Some Game. You like it here? Go ahead and subscribe to 100 Some Game on your preferred platform. While you're at it, I'd love to hear about what you're thinking of this podcast, any episode requests, or further feedback. It'll help me make this podcast better for you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.